Hi, my name is Katie. Today I'm going to show you just how easy it is to launch an open source Greenplum cluster on AWS. By filling out a multi-step form and clicking a few buttons, you'll be up and running with a Greenplum cluster in just a few minutes. Let's take a look at a few prerequisites. The AWS secret key and access key. There are a few items you'll need to gather before we get started. First, a valid AWS IAM key pairing consisting of an access key and secret key with full privileges to X, Y, and Z. Depending on your organization structure, you may need to request this from your AWS system administrator. We will be using the access key and secret key to launch the Greenplum cluster and create the required resources. If you don't know what these are, please take a look at this link and go ahead and read the tutorials on how to find the access key and secret key. Let's take a look at the AWS region. You'll want to choose an AWS region to spin up the cluster. Generally, you want to pick an AWS region that is the closest to the people that will be using the cluster. An option for regions will be available within the sign-up form. Just be mindful of where you want this cluster to be at. Finally, before we jump in, be mindful of a rough estimate for your cluster use. Ask yourself the following questions. Do you want a general cluster to try Greenplum with a small data set? Do you need a cluster with a large amount of storage capacity? Or possibly, you want a cluster that trades raw capacity for extreme I/O speeds. Choosing the right cluster use specifically for your organization's workload will make a great first experience with Greenplum. Let's get started with the form. The first part of this form will ask you some basic information about yourself. Go ahead and fill out your name, your company, your role, email address, phone number, and company address. Please use a valid email address, otherwise you may not get a PEM file required to SSH into your new cluster. We'll cover that a bit later. Once you're done, go ahead and click Next to proceed to the next section. The second part of this form will ask for your AWS access key, AWS secret key, and the AWS region you wish to use. The region is where your Greenplum cluster will be launched at. It's important to choose one closest to you or your organization. We will also ask your expertise in Greenplum and AWS. If you want the simplest and fastest way to your new cluster, choose Basic. Let's go ahead and fill in the information. We recommend only going the advanced route if you're familiar with specific Greenplum terminology and features, as well as AWS EC2 lingo. Click Next when you're ready to move on. Now let's take a look at configuring your cluster. On this page, you will specify what your cluster use is. There are three categories for cluster use: compute-focused, storage-focused, and high I/O focused. Each has their pros and cons. The compute-focused has a higher ratio of CPUs, but not a lot of storage space at all. I'd recommend the medium compute-focused option if you just want to try out Greenplum and are not planning to load much data at all. Storage-focused is great when you have terabytes of data. This is the cheapest cost per terabyte option because it uses hard drives. High I/O focused options has less storage capacity but uses solid-state drives instead for faster reads and writes. You can click through the different types and play around with it a bit to see how the price estimation and max usable database size changes. Make sure to change the number of compute nodes to use as well. Behind the scenes, this is choosing the type of AWS EC2 instance to use for the Greenplum nodes. Let's go ahead and select from the list. We'll go ahead and do one compute node. You'll see the pricing down here below. The minimum number of compute nodes is 1. There will always be a master node spinning up in addition to the number of compute nodes. There is a default EC2 limit for each type available. We list the default limit when you select something different. You can have these limits raised in the AWS EC2 console if you wish to spin up a larger cluster or higher performing instances. If you try to launch a stack with a number of nodes greater than your limit for the region and type, the launch will fail and you'll have to start over again. We list here some other useful information like the total on-demand hourly costs and monthly costs for your cluster. This cost is just an estimation, so be sure to use the AWS calculator for an up-to-date estimation. This cost can be reduced further by using reserved instances. When you're ready to move on, go ahead and click the Review Before Launch. This is the last page to review before launching your Greenplum cluster. It shows the same summary as the last page, the number of nodes you're spinning up, and the resource information for each node, CPU memory, usable capacity, and the network I/O performance on it. If you want to review other resource information for other cluster uses, click the Back button and select a new option and click Review again. This way you can see how the resources change. Finally, when you're ready, click the Launch button. If all goes well, you'll get a successful message with a link to view the AWS Greenplum stack spinning up. If you've received a different message, there should be helpful errors telling you what went wrong. Some common issues are going over your Ec2 limits, having too many VPCs in that region already, or the cluster already exists. While you're waiting for the cluster to finish spinning up, check your email. You'll have an email from ZData with a handful of links to articles on how to get started using Greenplum, how to manage your Greenplum cluster, and some information on other offerings we have. If you chose the basic option, we will also create a PEM key for you. This key is used to SSH into your new Greenplum master. Congratulations! You now have open source Greenplum running on AWS. Be sure to check your email for information on how to manage your cluster and start loading data.